You're sitting in class for a presentation. Someone who you're not a huge fan of volunteers to go first. And oh great, you think, they head up to the podium to present. The teacher asks for their topic. It's actually something you like and support. The presentation begins. The presenter actually makes a lot of good points, and under normal circumstances, you would have loved their presentation. But oh my god, that one thing they said in the middle. After their presentation, all you remember is that one part that bothered you, not all the good points that you agreed with. The next person to present is one of your best friends, someone you really like, respect, and find intelligent. But their presentation is awful. With the exception of their opening line, the presentation was incredibly subpar. After you leave class, all you remember about your friend's project is the one good line, not all the bad parts. Rather than taking both presentations at face value, you confirmed assumptions you made about the possible quality of the projects based on what you thought of the presenters, not the actual presentations. When given new information, it's often a whole lot easier to assimilate the new information into existing schemas than it is to adjust your worldview and conceptual understandings. Dr. Shahram Heshmat, a professor at the University of Illinois specializing in behavioral economics, says that confirmation bias occurs from the direct influence of desires on beliefs. When people would like a certain idea or concept to be true, they end up believing it to be true. They are motivated by wishful thinking. This error leads the individual to stop gathering information when the evidence gathered so far concerns the views or prejudices one would like to be true. In the context of our theoretical class presentations, you stop paying attention to the student you don't like as soon as they said something you disagreed with, and you were convinced that your friend's project was good by their opening line. You confirmed your bias against both presenters and only took away what made your preconceived notions true. You were a great example of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is especially strong once you are emotionally invested in something. Politics is often a great example of this emotional involvement. In a 2004 study at Emory University, 30 men, half self-describing themselves as strong Republicans and half self-describing as strong Democrats, were presented with quotes from George W. Bush and John Kerry. Not surprisingly, the Republicans were more critical of Kerry and forgiving of Bush, whereas the Democrats were harder on Bush and more lenient on Kerry. During the study, all subjects underwent an fMRI scan during the presentation of the quotes. The results of the neuroimaging yielded interesting results. Rather than the logic centers of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex activating to process the quotes, the emotional centers of the orbital frontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, and the posterior cingulate lit up. Rather than logically making decisions based on the information at hand, the center of the brain responsible for emotions, conflict resolution, moral judgment, and accountability took over. It would seem that politics is currently more emotionally driven than it is logically. You've probably witnessed some emotional displays of political disagreement both here at Peyton, in heated debates between students, to national television, where political candidates exchange verbal blows to try and drum up support. In order to get a more active and hands-on look at confirmation bias in politics, I spoke briefly with Michael Federico, political director at the Chicago Republican Party. Based on my own experience door knocking and phone banking, people get very mad or upset very quickly if they don't like the candidate or issue you're advocating for. Mr. Federico commented that in his experience, voters and constituents only hear what they want to hear. It's incredibly difficult to change people's minds, so what you see a lot of now is efforts to increase voter turnout, to appeal solely to those who are already on your side, Federico said. This trend of only appealing to those on one side of the aisle is a result of political polarization. Political polarization is a term that describes the trend in which people are more likely to only support one idea, stance, or political party. A growing gap between Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals, call the gap whatever you'd like. People stand divided. The new question arises, why? What has made us more divided? The last Congress has been the least effective and efficient in American history. Americans face the largest partisan gap since the Civil War. While people will always use confirmation bias to an extent, picking and choosing what information to use and remember, the media itself also plays a large role in polarizing society. Using the old adage, birds of a feather flock together, people have always tended to surround themselves with people similar to themselves. Think about your friends for a moment. You probably have a lot of common interests, shared experiences, and opinions. Picking friends similar to yourself is not inherently wrong. It's natural. What is wrong is what can follow as a result. Confirmation bias will occur no matter what, But it's all the easier to maintain a belief, stance, or opinion, or even prejudice if there's no one around to call you out or challenge your views. No one likes to fight or be challenged constantly. That isn't fun. The key is mutual understanding and respect. You obviously don't want to surround yourself with people that will only attack you, but having a diverse friend group is fundamental in maintaining a well-balanced worldview. Just like having a diverse friend group to keep you thinking and prevent you from falling victim to confirmation bias, it's important to both actively consider where you get your information from and to make sure you have a variety of sources, preferably neutral, unbiased ones, so you yourself don't succumb to the overwhelming confirmation bias present in our society. Think about where you get most of your news from. If it's your friends, they're most likely like you, so that's biased. On Facebook, you literally only see what you've liked, so that's biased. And, quite frankly, even if you get your news from the news or the newspaper, most media outfits have a pretty serious bias or slant one way or the other. It gets a whole lot easier to play straight into the hands of confirmation bias once you can pick and choose not only what you choose to remember, but also choose to only listen and read things that support your beliefs to begin with. Only watching Fox as a conservative or MSNBC as a liberal guarantees that you will confirm your biases because you will only see things that you agree with. That creates a polarized you, and if everyone only consumes information they agree with, you end up with a polarized country. Coincidentally, this is what has happened, and this is what we have, a polarized country. In order to examine how people process information effortfully or emotionally, I performed a slightly modified version of the study at Emory. Obviously, I don't have an fMRI machine to scan people's neural activity, but I did have sheets of paper to describe the participants' response. In my experiment, I first asked if the participant considered themselves to be a liberal or a conservative. Of the 30 people I surveyed, 21 identified as liberal and 9 as conservative. I then told the subject that they would be presented with 2 quotes from Bernie Sanders, a very liberal politician, and 2 quotes from Donald Trump, a conservative politician. Following each quote, the participants were asked to agree or disagree with the quote, and then asked to type their emotional response. The sneaky part of the survey was that the quotes presented that were supposedly Sanders quotes were actually conservative statements made by Trump, and the supposed Trump quotes were actually liberal quotes by Bernie. This was a test of name recognition and confirmation bias. While the survey was anonymous, roughly 1/3 of the participants were not fooled by the ruse. Most of them, from the times I surveyed older participants more likely to be politically knowledgeable. 19 of the 30 participants agreed with the quotes that contradicted their expressed ideological views, and sided with the candidate from their side of the aisle, despite the fact that the quotes were from the opposition candidate. The results of the survey could mean several things. First, it could mean that the people surveyed have no idea what conservative or liberal means. Uninformed voters, something that is decently probable, means that perhaps the liberals truly agreed with the Trump quotes, and that the conservatives agreed with Bernie if the quotes were framed in a positive way. Second, it could just have been confirmation bias. Self-describing liberals or conservatives wanted to believe and support the candidate they know to have similar views, despite the fact that in the survey the quotes were opposition party views. In the future, it would be helpful to survey a larger group of participants, and to run a control group in which the participants are shown quotes from the actual candidate of their party, to test the effects of confirmation bias versus political illiteracy. Following the results of my research and survey, here is the big takeaway. Effortfully process what is presented to you. Don't just passively consume information and let yourself be taken by confirmation bias. Think before you act. Think while you're presented with new information. That's the only way to stop confirmation bias. Think.